That moment when you need to have a difficult conversation and everything in you wants to avoid it? Your stomach tightens, you keep putting it off, and you find yourself rehearsing what to say over and over. I've experienced this more times than I would like to admit. I remember this one time where I needed to address some work that wasn't meeting expectations with someone I genuinely cared about, and I wanted to see them succeed. I felt torn between supporting them and holding them accountable by addressing what needed to change. Here's what I have learned after years of working with leaders and along with being a leader myself. The hardest part of these conversations isn't just what you need to say, it is what feels at risk for you in saying it. I did not want to be seen as unsupportive. I didn't want to be perceived as nitpicking. I also knew not addressing the issue was not going to serve them, me, or our shared purpose. And that tension between what we value and what feels at risk is where real leadership happens. Let me take you back to a leadership moment that still makes me pause. I was leading a team member who I deeply believed in. They had tremendous potential, but their work on a critical project, it just wasn't aligned with what we needed to deliver and what I knew that they were capable of. I kept putting off the conversation. Why? Because something felt deeply at risk, not just for them, but for me too. For them, I worried about damaging their confidence or having them feel unsupported. Yet I had to examine what was at risk for me in this conversation. Would addressing this make me the bad guy instead of the supportive leader that I strive to be? Would they think that I was overly critical and didn't believe in them? Would this harm our relationship, which I deeply value? This happens to all of us. The conversation becomes difficult not because of the content, but because of the values and identities that feel at stake on both sides. According to researchers Stone, Patton, and Hen, who wrote Difficult Conversations, these interactions activate what they call the identity conversation. What this situation means about who we are and what we value. Think about a difficult conversation that you've been avoiding. Beyond the actual topic, what feels at risk for you personally? Your identity as a supportive leader? Your value of being fair and balanced? Or your desire to be respected and trusted? Or could it be your fear of creating conflict when you value harmony? When we avoid or struggle with these conversations, we are often trying to protect something about our self image while also being genuinely concerned about the other person. Now, here's where it can get interesting and where my avocado analogy comes in handy. Yes, I'm about to connect difficult conversations to avocados. So stay with me. Just like an avocado's worth doesn't change based on someone's opinion, your worth as a leader doesn't change when you need to have a difficult conversation. But we often act like it does, don't we? I've definitely found myself thinking, if I address this issue, they may not see me as supportive anymore. As if my entire identity as a caring leader was hanging in the balance of one of those conversations. What's actually happening is that our deepest values are creating a tension. And this tension is with each other. If you value both honesty and harmony, having to deliver tough feedback creates an internal conflict. If you value both excellence and being supportive, addressing underperformance can feel like betraying one value for another. If you value both accountability and compassion, holding someone to standards while caring about their feelings, it can create tension. I want you to pause for a moment and consider, in that difficult conversation that you have been avoiding, what feels in conflict? What aspects of your leadership identity seem at odds with the other? For me, I value both nurturing growth and maintaining standards. When someone I care about isn't meeting expectations, these values seem to pull me in opposite directions. But here is the breakthrough: they don't have to. This isn't about managing a conversation, it's about integrating seemingly opposing values. That's the heart of the Know Your Truth pillar from my framework for connected leadership. The breakthrough comes when you realize true support sometimes means having the conversations that others are avoiding. Real compassion can look like honest feedback. Your values, they're not actually in conflict. They're asking you to show up with greater wholeness. This is exactly where receive, perceive, and respond can become your leadership superpower. So let me walk you through how I use the framework with my team member. I started with receive, and this is where I was able to see what is actually happening, not just the performance issue, but my own internal resistance to addressing it. I had to acknowledge both my concerns for them and my fear about how the conversation may affect how they saw me. Whew. Before having that conversation, I literally took time to sit down with both realities. I really care about this person and I need to address this issue. Notice the and, not the but. This small shift helps you hold both truths simultaneously rather than seeing them in opposition. And yes, I literally write down what I'm afraid might happen and the values that feel at risk just to get it out of my head. In my notebook, well, it has seen some pretty dramatic worst case scenarios that never actually, thank goodness, materialized. Perceive, this is where the magic happens. This is where I get to examine the stories that I have been telling myself. If I address this underperformance, they'll think that I don't believe in them. If I'm direct about the issues, I'm not being supportive. If I push for what's needed, our relationship might be damaged. When I examine these beliefs, I realize they're not necessarily true. In fact, not addressing the issues would be truly the unsupportive choice. I would be denying them of the opportunity to grow. Your perception, it creates your reality. So the story that you're telling yourself about what the conversation means, it will actually shape how you approach it. Respond. I could now respond from an integrated place, being intentional, honoring both my value of supporting this person and my commitment to excellence. Instead of avoiding or softening the message, I leaned in with clarity and care. It went a little something like this: I'm having this conversation because I believe in you and your potential. That is why I need to be very clear about where things currently stand and what needs to change. This conversation wasn't easy, but it was meaningful. Here's the surprising part. Afterward, they thanked me for believing in them enough to be honest. I was actually shocked because one of the things that they told me is that they had never had a leader that would share something like that with them, to give them an opportunity to course correct before it was too late. This practice isn't just a communication tactic, it is leadership transformation. It's about dismantling the beliefs that drive your fears and uncomfortable feelings so that you can show up with your full values integrated rather than in conflict. Here's the beautiful part. When you lean into these conversations with this level of self awareness, you create the possibility for genuine growth, both for yourself and for the people that you lead. The difficult conversations we most need to have are often the ones where something we value feels at risk. However, when we can identify what's really at stake for us and others, we can lead intentionally from an integrated place rather than a conflicted one. So here is your reflection. What difficult conversation have you been avoiding? And what values seem to be in tension? How might this awareness help you approach the conversation differently? Drop your insights in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you discover about your own values and how they shape your leadership approach. Remember, real leadership isn't about avoiding what feels difficult, but leaning in to dismantle the beliefs that keep us from showing up our fullest, most integrated selves.